Hey, vinyl community, Steve, FlipSideCT here. Got a special edition. This is not the one I wanted to do. This is one that I just thought up because I got an album this past Friday. It just came out. I pre-ordered it and been listening to it. And I got to turn some of you folks who are into this genre. This is like my third time doing this video. I hate that because it was like 30 minutes long. No way. So I'm gonna cook through this. Walter Lure and the Waldos. Okay. Some of you may say, well, who? What? I'm hoping a lot of you know who Walter Lure is. Iconic figure in the punk scene, and I'm gonna prove you why. And I'm going to give you a timeline, some history about this guy, show you some video clips, some funny things, some music that he was related to, and you're going to know and recognize that, but also talk about, again, his timeline and what he's about. This album, just like I said, released, it's August 17th, 2018 is when this came out. This has red vinyl. This is 500 copies. I do not know if any more are coming out. I do know that Walter is playing in New York City next month for $10, $15. Probably doing this album. That's just phenomenal to be doing that for that price. I am highly considering that, and who knows. So I'm excited here. I want to give you this information about Walter. That's what this is about. So you have an idea what he's about, and then play you some music of this new album, which is just killer stuff. This is what I'm about. This is the Dolls or Johnny Thunders, some Sex Pistol sounds, some good raw rock and roll like Some Girls Stones, heavy, bash and pop, Tommy Stinson. Walter has a cool past and knew a lot of people, knows a lot of people. He's still around, rocking and rolling. He's about 70 years old now. He's a grandfather. And let me start off, and I'm going to move kind of quick here. I will show you some visuals, and hopefully this is all going to connect and make some sense for you. So this is a treat. And I'm hoping you get something out of this and you buy this record and listen to it and let me know what you think of it too. Walter Lure, L-U-R-E, grew up in Long Island. His family wasn't musical, but he and his younger brother were. Richard. Walter was a good student, just did sports, and just a good kid. And he picked up guitar and wound up being in bands in high school, being in a couple bands after high school. He wound up in the early 70s playing in a band eventually called the Demons. And the Demons had a lead singer named Elliot Kidd. Elliot was really unique in the sense that he was actually a drug dealer too. But he was pretty famous. He's in these books, quoted. And he was in the room the night of Sid and Nancy's fiasco, that evening where Nancy died. So that's where he had some notoriety, whatever you want to call it. So Elliot was a drug dealer, and his specialty was cocaine, and his specialty client was the New York Dolls. So he was really in with them. Next thing you know, he's able to use the Dolls rehearsal space. Demons move in, they hang out with the rehearsing at the Dolls space when they're not there, and they're all is cool. Now the Dolls, fast forward around this time frame where Malcolm McLaren, how I don't know all the details, but Malcolm and Vivian Westwood came over, and they were into the clothing scene, but they saw what was happening in the downtown New York area. And he eventually became manager for the Dolls. Red patent leather was his the gear he got them dressed up in. Everything went downhill with the Dolls from there. It was just a disaster. There's a live album with the red patent leather. You could listen to it, but you probably won't want to buy it. It's pretty bad. The Dolls broke up in '75. They were touring. They were down in Florida. Johnny and Thunders and Jerry Nolan, the drummer, basically said, that's it. We're going back to New York City. Hence their drug addiction. They wanted to get back in New York and be comfortable in their environment. And at the same time, the same week, Richard Hell leaves television. He was so-called obnoxious. He was very, intellectual, really good songwriter, decent bass playing, but bass player. So what happens is the trio get together, Nolan, Thunders, and Hell, and form the Heartbreakers. And the Demons, they finally had a real gig, and it was in a lesbian bar, 82nd Club, and they usually don't have rock and roll bands, but they needed supplemental income, so they brought in rock and roll. So Elliot invited Johnny and Jerry, and there was Walter playing guitar, and they really thought this guy had it. And they asked him to come to an audition for the Heartbreakers the next week. And he does. And next thing you know, he doesn't hear anything for months. And he winds up going to a Heartbreakers gig. He runs into Jerry after. Jerry pulls him over into a staircase and says, hey, you want to join the band? So he's in. There was a July 4th show for the Demons at CBGB's. Just the last gig that they were going to have. Only 20 people showed up. The following day was a Heartbreakers gig and the debut for Walter with the other three guys, becoming a four-piece. Packed house, sweaty and nasty at the CBGB's. Line out the door, and Walter made it. He was in. Everything was clicking. They were all they were playing, doing their Heartbreakers gigs. Still, on the bad side with the drugs. Hence, now Walter gets the monkey on his back, and Richard's apartment is where he starts, and he got caught and trapped. And this is what they would do before rehearsals. Oh, and Dee Dee would join them, of course, because he was into it. It was the cool thing to do. So they thought. And it just, before rehearsals was a shooting up episode. So at this time frame, so it was around 75, record deals and labels, label terms were really lousy. The record industry thought punk was really just temporary. We're not going to go there. And I think some of that history. So now, another character that comes in is Lee Black Childers. He is a guy who came in around 1968 from Kentucky. He was gay. He winds up making friends with Jackie Curtis. Jackie is one of the artists, drag queens who are in the factory with Andy Warhol. This all clicks. This moves forward for him. Lee becomes a photographer for this Warhol clan. He also loves the dark side. He loves the rebellious side. He starts photographing addicts and the New York City downtown life. the unsafe areas. He says anybody could take a picture of a sunset or some driftwood. He wanted the hard, the obscure, and the raw. So that's what he did, and he became really well known. How he became a tour manager, I'm not sure. It's really interesting. If anyone knows, let me know. But he was manager for Bowie, Iggy, from the 72-74 tour, which is a phenomenal one, and Thunders and Heartbreakers. And keeping in mind, too, that Lee was a drag queen, and proud of it. Long story short, he did die in 2014 in LA. So in 76, eventually Richard Hell had this meeting in his apartment, and the guys came over, and what he told Johnny and Jerry and Walter, that he wanted Johnny to only sing 2 songs and Walter not to sing any, and he was going to sing most of everything. Ironically, that same evening in that same meeting, Johnny was going to tell him he didn't want Richard to sing. So next thing you know, they walk out. The 3 of them just leave Richard, and he's gone. He's out of the band. They basically knew that he wanted to leverage his intellectual poetry and his readings and his literature rather than do rock and roll. So it turned out to be a safe bet there. And so now the band needed a bass player. So long story short, they bring in a guy named Billy Rath. And he's the new bass player. And now we got finally the core Heartbreakers. Out of the blue, Lee gets a call from Malcolm McLaren. And he wants to know if Heartbreakers want to join the Pistols, Clash, and the Damned for an Anarchy UK tour. So, as a note, a while back, Malcolm did ask the Dolls if they wanted to come over to the UK, but David said no. He was, I guess, the leader, and said no. But the Heartbreakers said, "This is great. Let's do something different. Let's go over there. We hear things are happening." They fly over to London. The same night they arrived was the infamous Bill Grundy show with the Pistols. Queen was supposed to be on the Bill Grundy show, but couldn't make it, and they substituted the Pistols. And that's history. If you haven't seen Bill Grundy and the Sex Pistols, check it out. This is where Bill Grundy was drunk as all heck and made obnoxious comments and pushed the Pistols to, basically curse. And that was just a disaster in the sense of the UK public hearing curse words on TV. Next thing you know, it's great publicity for the Pistols and this tour, so they thought. But what wound up happening was 13 out of 20 concert shows for this tour were canceled. They only had 7. So the nights, mind you, this is also all expenses paid for the Heartbreakers, so they really dug it. The nights they didn't play, they'd go party into the hotel bar and just get wasted, have fun, have a blast. It was a really good time. They did get along. The Damned actually toured by themselves on a bus or something, but eventually the Heartbreakers did get friendly with the Damned also. But they liked the Clash and they liked the Pistols. Everyone got along. What was interesting was they would say, Walter, I think, had mentioned that Johnny, when you were with him alone, great, sweet guy. When the media or something was around, he turned into this persona, which shot him in the foot with other folks. So that was interesting. So the Heartbreakers liked UK. They felt it was more fun in New York City. So this is information I got from Walter's interview, which was really cool. There's a few out there. And the UK bands were a lot younger, but not as talented musically. New York City artists were definitely tighter and better and older. But they liked the energy and enthusiasm that the UK crowd had. As you can imagine, as you know, that energy really came out. New York City was that heroin, was that, let's be cool, like I mentioned. In the UK, the drugs of choice was hash, acid, and speed, hence the craziness that they had. The three other bands, when the Heartbreakers would go on, they would sit on the sides several times and watch the Heartbreakers. They were in complete awe of Walter and Johnny. These guys were just, the peak. So Walter was bisexual. He wasn't advertising on the Heartbreakers. There were some times he was caught, but it wasn't really flagged or just made a big deal. And Johnny and Jerry, didn't dislike gays, but Walter did say Jerry was a little homophobic. Keep in mind also, like I mentioned, Lee, the manager, was a flaming drag queen. So a really unique bunch of folks, but it really gelled. The Heartbreakers, after the tour of the Anarchy, decided they wanted to stay. They didn't have much money, but they liked UK. They liked the possibilities of getting big there. They did some gigs, and eventually Track Records asked them to sign a contract and make a record. And they rehearsed and were pretty much into this. And LAMF, Like a Motherfucker album, was built 1977. This album was a post-production nightmare. The quality of the original is not good. Similar to some of the Dolls' first album, not a great production. And it's sort of like a curse of Johnny that they started saying wherever he goes. They did a lot of work and a lot of changes they tried, but it didn't work out. The original wasn't a great sound. Recent reissues are, supposedly. I still got to get the reissue. And the Heartbreakers, after that, played on and off with Johnny, with the Heartbreakers as a whole unit or as separate. Johnny.
This guy all dressed in leather, right? He opens his pants, right? And this big thing comes out over here, right?
Separate. Johnny went to Paris and did his own things. He wanted to do solo. Walter still had the monkey on his back. He was still into the drugs. In 1979, they played the Farewell live at Max's Kansas City Heartbreakers show, and that's an album. And Walter was on and off playing until about 1981. He ran out of money. He wound up going to his dad, who was a banker and a successful banker, retired, and knew some people. And Walter eventually got a job as a data entry clerk in a finance company. He took what he can, still on the drugs, and he started growing and gaining knowledge and learning. He was expanding with stocks and bonds, and he then jumped to a brokerage firm, and he started learning about IPOs and sales and trading and margins and legal stock transfers. So his knowledge was really good. He was a smart guy in that sense. He was really like a sponge, and he got it. He was still on dope, secretly doing this, also doing gigs while he was, doing this this Wall Street tour. He did work with the Ramones in the mid '80s, also 3 of those albums: Mondo, Subterranean, and the other one, Too Young. Anyway, so in '88 he got off the dope. He figured he had to. He did it. He accomplished that, and that was one of his best accomplishments in his life, he said. He started getting good relationships, and things just really started blossoming for him. Johnny had died in '91. He went down to New Orleans the day after. He went into a bar across the street looking for drugs. Supposedly got a bad batch of something and took some methadone and just OD'd. A fiasco, a nightmare. People are saying that it was a robbery. They knew he had money. They knew who he was. So there's a new movie coming out, Thunder's Room 37. So I'll mention that in a little bit. But Jerry passed away just a little longer in '92 of a stroke. He had meningitis and pneumonia, but he died in '92. But before that, he was helping and working with Walter in a new band called the Waldos. That's where they started in the early '90s. Now, the Waldos was a great, talented band. Joel Pinter was a fellow who was a highlight with the Waldos. He was like just a punk roller, whatever that's what you want to call it. He had the image, he had the sound. He was just really perfect. So they made in '93, '94 an album called Rent Party. That's what Walter called the Heartbreakers gigs. It was just like a rent party. So they made this album in '94. At the same time, Walter has 125 people working for him, making about $300,000 to $400,000 a year. He's still doing gigs, so he's Jekyll and hiding it, basically. And just, living this by life. No pun intended. He got a job at Lehman Brothers, and then eventually in 2008, that went bust, as we know. He then worked for an asset management firm, and he finally retired in 2015. Still doing stocks, but he still did touring. He did the 40th anniversary for LAMF, got some great bands together. He had a child back in his early days. He saw this girl for 5 months. He didn't even think it was his child. Make a long story short, he gets a visit, and his son visits him at a gig. They connect and become, best of friends. Walter now has 2 grandchildren, 2 girl grandkids at 5 years old. And that's a good story, happy ending. But now, this brings me to today, to this album, which is just sweet. It's just like where Rent Party left off. Different band, though. One thing is that Andy Chernoff, he is a guy who founded the Dictators. He produced the Rent Party album. He also produced this, so that's why I think the sounds just the same. First song, Crazy Kids, just blew me out because it has that pistol sound, purposely too. And I just love the production of the Bullocks, and this just is just so good and clean.
Every step to the
Damn Your Soul, another song, just killer. So, you got to look into this album. You got to let me know your thoughts. I hope you're getting some out of this. If you're there, hello. I enjoyed doing this. Walter the Lord and the Waldos. If you're into this music, this sound, get this. You won't be disappointed. Let me know how you like the whole album. I'm psyched as all hell. Like I said, I ordered Rent Party and waiting. Thanks, VC. Hope you enjoyed. Keep listening. Bye-bye.